Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington with the Spirit of EQ, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. Today's episode is on the problem and opportunity of bias.
Life is a journey. Spirit of EQ helps shape and guide the road ahead for individuals, leaders, teams, and organizations striving to realize their full potential through emotional intelligence. Spirit of EQ is a coaching and consulting company that assists individuals and businesses to reach their full potential by developing emotional intelligence. In business, managers and leaders recognize the value of training to develop leadership skills. What they may not realize is that those skills are far more effective when they pay attention to not only performance, but also to people. Emotional intelligence is a crucial skill because people drive performance and emotions drive people. After this podcast, listen for a special opportunity to learn more.
Joining me as always is Jeff East with the Spirit of EQ. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, Eric, and everyone out there.
When I hear the word bias, I tend to go negative, Jeff, but I know that this is not about negative bias per se. So can you start off by telling the audience, what does bias mean to you?
Well, if you just kind of think of it in a neutral, bias is just right or wrong, thinking of things one way or the other, having, and in this case, more having a preconceived idea about something, someone, an event, things like that.
So could that be like anger? It's bad.
It's bad.
Yeah, because, you know, my dad always blew up when I was a kid, and that's not what I want to be.
No, anger, if somebody gets angry and has a blow up, not so good. But if something makes you angry and it motivates you to make a change, either in yourself or in a situation. If homelessness makes you angry, because we have homeless people, you can just be angry about it and have negative things when you see somebody on the street, or you can get involved.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
yeah,
that's an example.
Good clarification there. So I know today's episode, we're also going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. Obviously, that's a term that's been used a lot. I practice it. It's been really, really beneficial for me. So maybe in the context of this episode, talk a little bit about what mindfulness is and maybe the definition, those kind of things.
Yeah, mindfulness is just like you said, it's taking the time to be aware of what's going on inside yourself, to actually be aware of what's going on in the world around you, with the people that you're with. I know that people are probably getting tired of hearing us say this, but it's a practice, just like emotional intelligence is.
Yep.
It's something that you need to do. Some people do it a lot of different ways. Some people, spend, time in meditative state, in meditation, different relaxations. Mindfulness, it can just be something people practice all day long. I know people that are mindful. It's just a natural part of them because they practiced it.
Yeah. Well, you know what, too, Jeff, and I would throw this out. One of the things that helped me, a TED Talk by Andy Puddicombe. Might be mispronouncing his name, but if you look up Headspace, he has an app. But he gave a TED Talk some years ago, and it was mindfulness in 10 minutes. And it is one of the most wonderful talks I've ever seen. He's a very good communicator, but he also did a great job of demystifying mindfulness.
Right. A lot of the times when we talk about these kind of practices, people just go down a certain path. So they have a bias about what mindfulness is, that it is just about meditation. It might be an Eastern religious practice, a Buddhism thing or something like that. And it can be, but that's not what, we're talking about, just how you do it. And that's up to you to choose, how you're going to be mindful. And to get kind of back on the topic of the bias part, being mindful of what's going on around you will help you take away those biases that you might have about situations.
Yeah. Jeff, I was wondering, and I don't know if you remember this or not, because I think this conversation happened in a hallway a bit ago. We were talking about the police departments and how they manage interacting with, the people of that particular city. And I know you had mentioned a force in Iowa somewhere where Dubuque, where they had really embraced emotional intelligence as a tool and learning, and how much it helped their complaint rates.
Citizen complaints just about went away.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about bias because there's a situation, and I had a friend whose son they're African American. They live in a fairly nice neighborhood. I've never been to their home, but I know the neighborhood, and he decided to, instead of wait for his mom to come pick him up to go to basketball practice, he decided he was going to walk, whatever. So he's kind of jogging through the neighborhood trying to get to practice on time. Police officer sees him and stops him. I don't know if they had any really polite words at the beginning, but it ended up they pretty much asked him to put down his things, to, hands up. I mean, it was just like why are you here? You don't belong here type thing. It's very clear to me that there was a certain bias there. Now, I'm not going the route, Jeff, of saying, well, see, that just shows you all police officers are racist.
Exactly.
And that, because that's not what it is. Because what, for me, piqued my curiosity is, well, what made that police officer decide that it was important to go that far? What was driving them? And we know typically that's some emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think about the bias thing. If you're not mindful, if you're not haven't gone down that path, you're going to kind of go with your bias. Bias is young African American teenager in a very affluent neighborhood, doesn't fit, therefore I do X.
Exactly.
And I may be oversimplifying that. And trust me, I have my own biases too. Mm-hmm. I just fully transparent, Jeff. I mean, if I see a pickup truck with a gun rack and a rebel flag, it makes me nervous. It just does. However, one of the powerful things about emotional intelligence is to pay attention to what is that emotion telling me. And I think where you're going, the good part of mindfulness is helping you be aware and to help you choose other paths than your bias.
Yeah, the reason that this subject kind of is kind of real to me right now is because of my grandchildren.
Okay.
I know Eric and I have talked about this, but my 3 grandchildren live out in Bryan, Texas, are a performing, working punk rock band. They're 14, 16, and 18 years old. And because of my type of music that I like to listen to, I'm very proud of them. And when I tell somebody about them, one, the name of their band is a great punk rock name I'm surprised nobody's ever taken. They're called Psychotic Tendencies.
Because they don't spell it with a P, though,
no,
right?
They spell it with an S-Y, which is an amazingly good punk rock name, I think.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking with someone about them and I say that they're a punk rock band, you can see a change in some people because they have a preconceived bias about now what kind of people they are.
Yes. And I would imagine that runs the gamut from the music to the lifestyle to
the appearance, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Well, my grandkids are smart kids. They are some of the most polite children that I know. I'm so proud of my daughter for that. They're just really good kids that like punk rock music and have decided to become a band. So people automatically assume who they are and what they're
Jeff,
about.
Can I ask you, there's really nothing wrong with having the bias, at least on its face, right?
Right.
I mean, as far as understanding. I mean, you would understand, like when I said about the pickup truck and the gun rack and stuff, you can understand why I might feel that way. The key, though, is what? You
need to take your emotional intelligence skills and actually understand what is really happening. Who, like in the case of my grandchildren, punk rockers have a bad reputation. So it's okay to have that as the first thought. But then when you start putting the person into it, in the case of my grandchildren, that's where the bias comes in. You don't know them. All punk rockers are not the same. Punk rock gets, because the style of music is the same, punk rock gets bled over into the neo-Nazi.
Yeah, they're associated as being their music of choice.
Okay.
Yep.
All the punk rockers I know hate those people because of what they're doing.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'm so glad that you have gone down this path with the mindfulness and bias piece, because I do believe mindfulness is one of the key steps in getting to a place where you can make a better informed judgment, if you will. And for the audience, it's kind of like what Jeff and I have said many, many times, that this does require work. You're going to have to work at this. But I do believe you can get to a place, because, Jeff, I'm going to see more trucks with gun racks and rebel flags. I have never called anyone out with that. And part of the reason is that I've always stopped, evaluate, where am I at? Why am I feeling this? What is this saying to me? And be able to move on to a better place. And quite frankly, maybe even move on to the place of where I interact with the person.
And that's why I think it's so important right now, especially with the political climate. It is almost impossible right now to have a calm, rational political discussion, whether it's person to person that have differing views, whether it's through the media, in Congress and the Senate. We can't do that anymore because we're so taught the other person is bad.
You know, I guess one of the things that's made me wonder about that is that what happened? When did we get to be, and hopefully this is not going to sound harsh, and if it does, forgive me. When did we get to be so mentally lazy? Because sometimes I think it's laziness, that we don't take the time. Because we know rationally, I mean intellectually, right, that just because you disagree with me on an issue does not make you a bad person. It does not mean that I should, as we hear, it's not a cancel mode. You know? Yeah. You don't agree with me, you're canceled. You know what I mean?
I like that, the lazy part, because we don't go to the next step. Okay, we're ideologically opposed. I most of the time don't have the opportunity to say, okay, tell me why you're opposed to what I think, and then I'll tell you why I'm opposed, and let's talk that out. There's going to be some common ground in there somewhere.
Yeah, and Jeff, I mean, you have heard this with me before. There are subjects, and obviously this does not rise to the same level as maybe a potential political issue or a cultural issue of race and those kind of things. But if you said to me, Eric, I think you should really listen to some punk rock. I like you to listen to my grandkids' music, maybe go back to the 70s, the Sex Pistols, Ramones, the Jam, all that. And it's really, really good. I think you need to listen to that. Jeff, I'm not really into punk rock. And then you said to me, well, why not? What, do you have something against us? Do you have something against those people? Well, no, Jeff, it's just not my kind of music, right? Now, I'm hoping, Jeff, that we could still be business partners.
Oh, yeah.
And we could still be friends. I mean, I'd hope that it wouldn't be you're telling me, okay, that's it. I'm done. End of story.
I hate to always use this thing when I say, I've got friends that just drives me nuts.
Right.
But I have friends that are big time into classical and opera. I don't like that. We're still friends. Yeah. They would never, ever want to listen to what I like to listen to.
Yeah.
And, music is important and isn't important, but...
I mean, I get it. I mean, someone could say, well, racial profiling is a bigger issue than a style of music that one may like. I've always believed that I have to be in a position to be able to disagree and still remain whole inside.
Yes.
Because typically those that can't tolerate any disagreement to their point of view, they don't realize that it's kind of the whole adage of drinking the poison and expecting the other person to die. So let me shift a bit. I really like a point you brought up to me earlier about mindfulness helps us see the full context for people's actions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When somebody is doing an action, we kind of talked. We touched on like a homeless person.
Yep.
That's out at the end of the off ramp on the freeway with their sign. What is the first thing you think when you see them? Do you think they're lazy and this is how they just want to make their money this way because they don't want to have an 8-to-5 job and pay taxes and do all the things that I've done my whole life? Or do I see somebody that because of some failings of our system, that's their only choice right now? Their action is to survive so that they don't starve. or they can scrape enough money together to rent that $100 a week, FOP house.
And what's interesting, Jeff, and I don't think we've ever talked about it specifically on our shows, but the Enneagram.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know your number, and what you just described is a lined up to your number, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and I'll tell the world here for me, and Jeff, our great producer Brett can edit it out if you don't want to do this, but can I tell the audience what your number is?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Brett, you're good. So you're a 9, Jeff,
Uh-huh.
right? And 9s are some of the most compassionate people on the planet.
They're known as the peacemaker.
The peacemaker, right? So your perspective, which you just described by the guy on the freeway with the sign and stuff. Now, I'm a 4, and the 4 is the creative, the romantic, the artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I see them, what I typically do is I go, well, a better way would be, what if they could find an organization to sponsor them, and then they could have it would be Mid-Ohio Food Bank, and that I'm connected to them, and they're working me through a program so that I can get from here to another place. And I just thought to myself, that's my creativeness. I see it from that perspective.
What's interesting is both of those ways of looking at it are mindful, because you're being aware of who you are, and you're not automatically putting that person you're not biasly, look, is that a word? It is now.
We'll take it.
Looking at someone as this or that. You're looking at them as the whole person and going from there.
Because our wiring, our personality, our being influences that heavily, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that wasn't where I thought we were going with that, but I like that.
Well, I'm sorry. You got to when you gave me that example, and immediately I went into my head going, I've seen them before, and that's the kind of stuff that goes through my mind. It's not so much, and don't get me wrong, please, those in the audience, at the end of the day, if somebody needs a meal and needs $1 or needs whatever, you're not going to sit there and go, okay, let's see, I'm a 4, so okay, that kind of thing. So I totally get that.
Well, that you were looking at it more globally, and that goes back. But I mentioned to people that when I mentioned what my grandkids do, you can see the look on their face.
Yes.
Now I can have a bias about that, and automatically put them into a category. Well, let's have a talk first.
Yes, because if you don't give them that opportunity, you may rob yourself of getting information that's really truly vulnerable. Because what if that person was mugged by a neo-Nazi who was heavily into punk rock? Would you fault them for being?
No.
Yeah.
And I think when we put a bias on a person or a person's actions, we've taken them out of the equation. We've taken their personhood, or whatever word you want to use, out of it, because now we think we know everything there is about them. And that's really dangerous, because speaking for myself, I don't know everything about me, let alone about anybody else.
Yeah. And realizing that making decisions on faulty data can really get you in trouble. Can really get you in trouble. Kind of bringing it back to the mindfulness piece, decreases, our negativity or the negative bias in us?
When we have a situation and it's not a positive one, because unfortunately in our life, most of the situations we're in do have some negativity to them. Things don't always go to where we want. So if you go into it with a negative bias, you've already decided this is just horrible. This is just bad. I can't recover from that. Guess what? You're never going to recover from it. If you go into a situation where you're not negative automatically, that's when you can learn from a situation, whether it's an interaction. If you and I get into a situation where we're having a big clash about something, and I'm just automatically negative about it, well, I'll never be able to have a discussion with Eric again. He's blank, 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 whatever words I want to use for that. Our relationship is probably on the rocks. But if I go into that negative situation and go, why did Eric react the way he did to what I said? And then, more importantly, why did I react to what he said? That's the mindfulness. Now I'm being aware of what's going on. That's when we can have that discussion. it goes back to, like I talked about before, politically. Why does this person believe something different than I believe? But if you go into it with that negative, you shut down any chance of turning it into a positive interaction or being able to learn anything or grow from the situation.
Yeah, I've said this before in other arenas. I welcome to sit down and talk with a white supremacist. I'd love to understand where they picked their view, how they came about seeing the world the way that they do, because deep down inside, I realize that there's something way, way down below that would reveal that it doesn't have anything to do with my skin color.
It's really interesting you said that. I've spent since around 90 in prison ministry.
Yes.
Most of the time that I've been doing this is down at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, Lucasville, which is famous for the longest prison riot ever.
It's a maximum security prison.
It's the best.
It's probably a supermax, is it not?
No, there's another supermax. Okay. This one is a maximum security, and it's an interesting prison because it's where you get sent when you can't follow the rules in the other prisons. It's kind of like the timeout prison. So you're not sentenced there normally for the crime you did, but doing this ministry over the years, I've got to meet a lot of interesting people. And the ministry that we do, you don't just go in for a weekend and you're done. You build relationships with them. And I've built relationships with the heads of the Bloods and the Crips, the Mexican Mafia, and then you mentioned white supremacists, the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a prison-formed gang, if you want to use that word.
Yep.
The racial thing is not what you would think for most of those people. I know we're going off on a tangent, but
great.
For most of those guys, it's about protection. It's not that a person of color is the enemy. It's I want to be with these guys because I'm protected.
Interesting.
That's not true in all cases, but in the majority of cases it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I get it because the person who has been harmed has a different perspective than the person who has harmed, right? But I like where you're going with this, the ability to kind of take a step back. And I know that is an area that we have had as our constant refrain throughout a number of our episodes is about the exercising of emotional intelligence. And I think that piece, and maybe toward the end, Jeff, maybe we can tell the audience a little bit about some practical tips about the practice of it and how to move it from just theory and information and kind of get into how it could be, employed, on a daily basis. But so
I just want to, I meant to say this at the beginning. A lot of this is being taken from an article from University of California at Berkeley, 3 ways mindfulness can make you less biased. So if people want to dig deeper, you can find this I'm sure you can find it on the internet. I got it from the 6 Second site, but I'm sure it's out there.
Google the article. Who's the author, by the way?
Jill, Suttie, Suttie.
Okay. All right. We'll have that in the show notes as well, everyone, so you'll be able to pick it up there as well.
It goes into some studies and stuff that I really don't want to get into now.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting.
So, Jeff, mindfulness may help us see others as equals.
And of the things we're talking about, I think this is the most important. Whenever we put ourselves on an unequal footing, either unequal because we're superior, or just as important, unequal as far as inferior, you're not really going to be able to have a decent relationship or interaction with that person. And for me, in everyday life, trying to treat everyone the same way. For me, I've mentioned it before when we talked about noble goal. My noble goal is to help people find the art in themselves. So if I'm looking for that in a person, I have to be able to treat them as an equal because they have something inside them that to me is infinitely valuable. And
Jeff, I'm going to stop you there because that kind of takes me to a conversation I had last week with a leader about the importance of having a noble goal and what it can do for you in other areas and the kind of lift that it brings to the other parts of life. Because you're right. If your deep driven, overarching purpose goal is I'm looking for the art in people. Well, you can't do a lot of that if you've got certain people who are worth the view, certain people who you don't know if they're worth the view, and then certain people you don't want to. It just doesn't work, you know? So I thought about that, and that kind of rang true for me. So,
and well, I'm going to go back. I started learning that before I even knew what emotional intelligence was. I never heard of it back when I started in the prison ministry, because it was very evident to me, observing some of the other volunteers who were seeing we call them residents, the prisoners, as equals, and who wasn't, and seeing the different ways that the reactions went. The volunteers that were treating the residents as inferior had absolutely no effect on the prisoner. The volunteers that were treating these guys as 100% equal, they were making an effect on those people's lives.
And let's face it, Jeff, at the end of the day, they are equals.
Oh, they are.
I mean, there's no one on the planet, no human being could say another human being is not my equal. That's
one of the things that we tell them, and especially for men, we could probably go back in our lives and pick a point where we made a decision that kept us out or put us in.
Yeah.
That would have started us down the road. And we make that very clear. And we also are very cognizant of sharing our stories, too.
Yeah.
With these guys. But I don't want to make this a prison ministry thing.
No, but it's good. It's true, man.
But yeah,
absolutely.
For me, that's when it started, when I started understanding that everybody was an equal person. That I'm going to give you another example that people think are strange. The company I work for used to have an office on Cleveland Avenue down around, not in a great part of town.
Okay.
And right next door to the office was, at one time, was a biker bar, then just a regular bar. But there was this couple that drove up, and they had an older car, and they would go through the dumpsters to get the aluminum.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right? So I had a preconceived idea of who they were. You know, they're just, low life, Well, I got to talk to them. And the reason they were doing that is they were on a fixed income. They had a nice apartment. They were doing this so they would have money every year to go visit their children in, I forget what state it was. I totally changed my idea about who those people were. And it was funny. So then we started bagging our aluminum cans. I went over and talked, even when it was a biker bar, and told them about these people. They started bagging all their and crushing and even for them, for those people, and setting them out on the days they know they would come.
Well, and I think that's a wonderful example too of, what you mentioned earlier about how much information do you truly have that allows you or moves you to have a certain amount of bias. And I think that runs the gamut. There's so much that you don't know, and the motivations, there's times, where I'll have, friends or family will say, "Did you hear what so-and-so said? What do you think about that? That's just not right." And I'll go, number one, unless I've met them and know them, I can't say. Mm-hmm. I know that doesn't fit the narrative of a quick soundbite or a tweet, but the reality is, and it shows. I mean, look around us. We're making all kinds of decisions with very, very limited and, if not, faulty data. Mm-hmm. So let's move into some of that practical stuff, Jeff.
Okay.
Since you started with the mindfulness thing, I would just say to the audience, if you get a chance, check out that TED Talk with Andy Pudakambe, Mindfulness in 10 Minutes, right? The way that I practice it, there's always a good time to do it. I go from 6:30 in the morning to 7 in meditation. And it's probably because I'm creative. I just can't box myself in that way. I practice it sometimes on a long drive. I practice it sometimes in the morning before anything's happening, and sometimes before I go to bed. But it is a beautiful way to set yourself up, and in this case, from what we're talking about in today's episode, to kind of check that bias thing and make sure that it is in its proper place. Go ahead, Jeff.
I kind of wanted to go through all the companies, but we've already talked about one, and I'm just going to talk about another one real quick.
All right. Well, let me set you up.
Okay.
So now, Jeff, see how that works? It's a good setup. Talk about how EQ can help, and in concert with what you just said about the competencies.
Yeah, the model of EQ we use, if you're familiar with it or not, you can go to our website. You can go to 6 Seconds, who is we're a preferred partner. They provide all the tools and the models that we use. It has basically 3 things: know yourself, understanding where you are, choosing yourself, deciding what you're going to do, and then giving yourself, which is the reason you're doing it. So there's 8 competencies: emotional literacy, recognizing patterns. There's those. But the 2 that I really want to talk about, we kind of talked on one now, is in pursuing your noble goal, understanding what is at the heart of yourself, what is it that is the most dear and central to who you are. And if you can identify that and work to live it, because we all struggle sometimes, that'll help you take away those biases. And then the other one I think is so important is make sure you have empathy for what's going on around you. When you're biased about something, have the empathy for that person or that situation to understand exactly what is going on. And then the same thing for you. If you're biased, have some self-empathy to take the time to explore, why am I thinking that? When you have that, because that's so important too, that's part of the mindfulness, is taking that time to reflect. Yeah. And then I'm going to give a plug for a Spirit of EQ product. The Spiritual Emotional Intelligence Assessment that we have.
Yeah, the SEQ.
SEQ. If you can learn to increase your spiritual emotional intelligence, which is blending the emotional intelligence, the thinking part of your brain with the spiritual part, and we've said it before, but that's not religious. The spiritual part is understanding how well you're connected with yourself, with the people close to you, and the world around you. For me, that has really helped me not be as biased as I used to be.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful.
And once again, that's something, if you're interested in, contact us. We'd love
absolutely.
to talk with you about that.
Yeah, and that's something, as most of the audience members probably realize, is that we're always open for a conversation, for you to learn more, and then maybe proceed on if you see it as a pathway to growth.
And if they are interested in any of these competencies, go back to some of our previous podcasts, and you can.
Yeah, the podcast history. I think probably the first episodes that we did, Jeff, were exclusively. We broke down each of the competencies, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So with that, we will say have a nice day, have a nice week, have a nice month, and thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for subscribing and listening to the Spirit of EQ podcast with Jeff East and Eric Pennington. Spirit of EQ is a preferred partner of 6 Seconds, the Emotional Intelligence Network. 6 Seconds is a nonprofit organization researching what works in emotional intelligence. Best practices are shared through methods and tools that are global, scientific, and transformational. To find out more about Spirit of EQ or to request a speaker, go to spiritofeq.com. Our contact information is in the podcast show notes as well. And now for our special offer.
Hi, this is Jeff again. I just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions or want more information about anything we've talked about, just send me a quick email. And my email is jeff@spiritofeq.com, and I'll get right back with you. Thanks.